Welcome to We Raise Foundation's Community Conversation on Facebook Live. My name's Joanne Oddie, and I'm the Director of Programs at We Raise. Today's community conversation features Beth Galik, Executive Director of River City Community Development Center, or R-City, and soon to be Dr. Y'Shanda Young-Rivera, who graduates tomorrow from Northwestern University with her Ph.D. in Learning Sciences. Congratulations, Y'Shanda. Together, they will discuss building a path from cradle to career for youth, particularly focusing on a cohort of junior high youth they worked with over the last 3 years. We are excited to be sharing this conversation via Facebook Live and look forward to your participation. Please share your questions or comments in the comment section below the video. Our We Raise team will be monitoring the thread, and as is relevant and as time allows, we'll share your questions with Beth and Y'Shanda for their insight. Respectful dialogue and sharing of different opinions is encouraged. Meanwhile, we are deeply committed to creating a safe, open, and edifying space for discussion, and per our social media policy, will, at our sole discretion, actively hide or delete any comments or users we believe are counterproductive to our intentions. You can review our full social media policy on our website. Our city is also offering 2 great giveaway items for 2 lucky people participating in today's community conversation. The first is a knit hat, and the second is a canvas bag. Post a comment at any time during this live discussion, and you may be randomly selected to receive one of these great Our City gifts. If you're selected, you'll need to send a direct message to We Raise Foundation to claim it. Beth, as one of our grantee partners, can you help frame the context of this conversation and share just a little bit about the mission and ministry of our city and the Peace Builders program that we're focusing on today that's for junior high youth?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Joanne, thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yes, so I'm Executive Director of our city, River City Community Development Center. It's a young organization, so we were only started in 2015. So we're in our 3rd year of operation, but it was founded by leaders of River City Community Church who had been working in the neighborhood already for 13 years at the point of our city's founding. The mission of our city is to build I got confused. Here we go. To bring together the best of our city to build a path for families to walk from cradle to career to the glory of God. So basically, we pick up our youth right now at kindergarten. Hopefully we'll get the cradle to kindergarten piece in the future, but we pick up our youth right now at age 5 at kindergarten. And we provide holistic programming and Christians who love them and pray for them and disciple them from that kindergarten spot to the transition to career. That work exists in 4 parts. The first part is Dream Builders. That's our children's summer and after school programs. This is a holistic program meant to keep them on track, both socio-emotionally and also educationally, so that they're ready to transition to the next phase of their journey. Then Peace Builders, our junior high piece, is for 6th through 8th graders, sometimes expanded to 5th through 8th graders, and that's meant to build peace with God, self, and others. Any of you who are parents of junior high youth or grandparents of junior high youth know that junior high is a very tricky and very emotional age when kids are feeling a lot of things, particularly our kids who have had trauma in their young life and have dealt with it as children deal with things. But then when they come to junior high, it becomes very loud in their lives, very felt, very real. And so our Peace Builders includes mentoring and team activities meant to transition them to the next phase, which is City Builders. City Builders provides paid apprenticeship for ages 12 to 18, either in our tuck pointing training program where children learn entry-level masonry skills, or working with our children in community service to them. This piece that we're talking about today is a combination of both Peace Builders and City Builders, meaning that it's both mentoring and team building activities and apprenticeships combined with those for 5th through 8th grade youth. All of this happens in the city of Chicago, in the best neighborhood in the whole city, which is West Humboldt Park. If you're wondering where this is, if you take North Avenue from anywhere and you take it out to Pulaski, that's right where we are. This is an area where beautiful groups of families, Mexican-American families mainly to the north, African-American families mainly to the west and the south, and then of course Humboldt Park is known for being the heart of the Puerto Rican community to the east. And so we serve kids from all these different groups.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that context, Beth. So what were some of the goals or motivations of our city that led to this research partnership with Y'Shanda?
So we knew we needed to start on this big mission of cradle to career at some point. We knew we couldn't just open our arms to the babies through 18-year-olds. And so we ended up going with the ones who were literally knocking down our door. Not down usually, the door's usually held, but knocking on our door. Our city is about half a block away right across the street from our local elementary school, which is pre-K through 8th grade and has a little under 900 students depending on the year. And so when our city started opening its doors, junior high youth would just come over. And so this project, as we looked at our mission and we looked at who was standing in front of us, this project was born. How do we work with the 5th through 8th graders who are here and help prepare them for the next level of what's to come? It was an evolving program because, as I mentioned, we're a young organization in our 3rd year of operation. This is 3 years of research. And so it was a program that changed and was molded very much as we moved along.
So how did the partnership with you kind of get pulled in at some point?
Well, Beth and I, we actually know each other for about 10 years now, Beth.
I'm sure.
And we were actually at a cookout. I mean, being perfectly honest, I don't know if you remember
That's great.
this. I was already back at Northwestern getting my starting to work on my Ph.D. And we were talking about what I was going to do for my research. And I responded to Beth that my heart was to look at how a community would come together to support young people socially and academically. And she was about to begin that fall, and she was like, come along and join us at River City. And so I was like, okay, not really knowing that it would turn into what it did. So that's the gist of it.
Okay, great. So Beth and Y'Shanda, what were some of the key learnings from your work with this cohort of youth that you think some of our listeners could benefit from?
I would probably say Beth talked about, as a researcher, Beth talked about how the program has evolved over the years, and something that I think your listeners would benefit from is understanding and knowing that anything that stays stagnant fails to grow and produce. And so one of the beautiful things that I watch as a researcher, as a person of faith, as an educator, was to see how River City and how our city and how Cameron, how they work together to modify as necessary what was the needs that were discovered, that were already known among the young people, to or what we would say their risk. And then they work together collectively. And each year we kind of modified that process to best form the protective factors that would suit those young people.
Okay. So when you say the word protective factors, can you say a little bit more about what that means? Some people may not be familiar with that language.
Okay, so actually risk and protective factors, it does come from the medical field. And it talks about those risks and that we've used in the educational field. So risk are those characteristics, it could be a community level, personal, that lead to an adverse outcome more than likely. And then protective factors are the characteristics that you put in place to circumvent them.
Okay.
And so we all have risk, and I just think I should put this part out there. One of my committee persons, she does this theoretical frame called the PVEST, and she talks about we all have risk. Usually we want to throw the term around at risk, and we have a certain kid in mind when we think at risk. And so I just want to throw that out. We're all at risk. We're born at risk. It's just a matter of, do we have the protective factors in place to decrease the vulnerability? And what these young people have what we've put together decreases their vulnerability protectively.
Okay, great. So tell us a little bit more about your emphasis on developing both leaders and learners and how that manifested in the programmatic aspects of the program.
Do you want me to?
I can intro you for a little bit if you want. So we started the project as most junior high programs are, which is primarily homework help, right?
Yeah, sure.
So we began by responding to the requests of the school, please help these, and we should preface it by saying we think the highest of Cameron Elementary School and their administration.
Yes.
I
Yes.
do not believe you can find a better group of
I
teachers
agree.
and administrators in the entire city. So we were very, very blessed to be able to work in collaboration with them in this project. So we began by responding to the requests of the school, which at that time were help keep their classroom academics on track, help get their homework done, and then to help facilitate family, school, kid communication and kind of reinforce some of the disciplinary things sometimes that come into play. And our goal all along was to develop leaders and learners. And so we thought, what better way? We'll do homework help. This is how they become learners. Then we'll talk to them about how they act in school. That's how they become leaders.
Right.
We found complete pushback against that. So they were not at all interested in being learners in regard to getting their homework done. And they were not interested in talking about the situation they had just had at school. They preferred very much to leave that at school. And so we began to look at this of, okay, what then is a leader and a learner? And if we take it outside of the pure brick walls of the educational context, how can we develop the learning and leading in their lives in a way that doesn't remind them of school, which they're really strongly pushing back against at this point in their lives?
Fascinating.
Yes. And I would add to that, this was a process. And when we initially came in, one thing that I really valued and loved when I came in, that to both Cameron and to River City in our city, that leader identity mattered. And when I first came along, some of the young people were not scholars. They were actually troublemakers, what we would call troublemakers. But our city was able to see the leaders under that tough persona. And so I remember talking to the associate pastor, and he pointed out that they didn't do so well at school, but when they came here, we saw leadership in them. And so that first year, it started out with being youth leaders. So it was called the Youth Leadership Cohort. And Beth is totally right. They wanted absolutely positively nothing to do with school. Yet, you feel that responsibility to understand that you need an academic foundation along this path from cradle to career. So it's not like you can go from the cradle and to the career without academics, especially it being so important. And so we were able to come along, and over the 3-year process, I'll quickly get to the last year, which is it evolved into a 4-component, and it's changed some even now, but it evolved into a 4-component, what we call the YLC experience, and it did the modeling, it did the apprenticeship, it did mentoring, we did drop-in, so it was optional. So you were no longer having to have to come and get your homework. And then we did what were called these Friday sessions, which as an educator, I was able to design them and implement them. And I still got the academic in, and they didn't even recognize it. And so that was the wonderful part. We did a lot of play, what we call using multimodal literacies, and they got the academics in, and Beth doesn't even know this because she's been gone for a year, but their reading grades went up each quarter, and their mindsets towards school, because she's right, and it's not the school, it wasn't Cameron, because it's an amazing place. It's something about, I guess I would say the institution, and that's a thread I can follow more in my research.
That makes
but
sense.
over the 3 years, Beth, every cohort, even this cohort, and we had honor roll students, A and B students, every single one of them talked about their displeasure and dislike of school. And so when I told, at the end of one of the interviews, one of the young kids said, I really enjoyed myself. I thought when we came, we were going to be doing all this work and learning, and we really weren't. And I looked at him and I said, actually, you were. So, yeah.
Fascinating. So can you give me an example of one of the things that maybe seemed like a game or fun to them, but had some element of academics to it?
Okay, so I can tell you of a particular session that was really powerful to me. And if you guys remember the month that the Parkland, Florida shootings happened. And so when we had come that Friday,
Yeah.
a cop had gotten shot in Chicago.
Yeah.
And then one of the young girls' dad passed away. So it was like a heavy week.
Yeah.
And so I asked if they wanted to keep the program as I had, and they wanted to. They didn't want to do something different. So anyway, we winded up putting a tablecloth down, and their goal was to flip it, along with the adult workers who were there. And when they flipped it, without any of them getting off. So they had to work together to flip this table. They had to instruct each other. They had to predict. They had to use what they already know, and they were able to do that in like 20 minutes. And I told them, you guys have it. It's flat enough. And I was like, we can leave it there. And they were like, no, we want to completely turn it over. And at the end, we would always have a discussion. And one of the young girls talked about motivation. Now, I have to tell you how all of this went together. And then we moved into a lesson that talked about problem solving. And there's a 5-step problem solving process that I developed and used for them. And then from that activity, they used problem solving to create final projects. And that create is the highest taxonomy there is in learning, when you're able to take what you've learned and create from it. So yes, we think sometimes you have to just regurgitate facts, but creating is able to show that you can take what you've learned along the way and actually put application to it.
That's great. What a blessing. So collaboration and approaching youth in a multifaceted way was really important in your holistic understanding of program development. And you talked already about how amazing Cameron was as a partner. Could you say just a little bit more about those collaborations, how they were built, and how each partner understood their unique role?
Yeah, so I would go back to the language of risk and protective factors, and how we found that a lot of times in community work, we focus on eliminating the risk factors, the things that are going wrong in a youth's life. It might be their school behavior, their attitude toward their teachers. It might be that their family is missing some people that are key to the structure of it, these different things. But when you shift it and look at simply adding enough protection for the youth to be able to overcome that, you can also get a successful youth that way. Because realistically, you may not be able to do anything about those risk factors, but you can build more protection around them. So, but what we found is that our youth would not always do well, actually would almost never do well all across the board at all the spaces they were involved in.
Sure.
However, they would do well at some of them, right? So they may be having huge trouble at school, but they would come to our city and be very successful. Or maybe our city that week, they were not feeling it and they had gotten themselves in trouble, but they could go to church, which is just show up at church, go to, normal church, and they could be successful in that space. And so we found this really necessary to the project, because in a lot of projects, you simply see youth that are engaged or not engaged in the program. Are they in it or are they not in it?
Yeah.
And if we look at it as this group of 3 organizations, and then knowing that the family and the community is also very important.
That's right.
And with all 3 partners anchored in the community, there's a lot of communication going on there. We were able to see the youth in a different way, that they could be failing in a certain sphere, but they may be engaging in another one. And then what is interesting is the one that they were doing well in would carry them through a period of time until they could re-engage where they weren't doing well.
Wow.
And so a lot of times junior hires just need a minute. Like they have it out for this certain teacher. They think the teacher has it out for them. But if they can get some space and they can come to a new understanding, they can go back and be successful in that same space.
Wow.
And so having 3 partners all engaging with the youth, the school very clearly was putting on school services.
Sure.
However, Cameron also has a very good counseling staff. So they were doing a lot of mental health partners that are engaged there. So they were doing not only traditional school, but a lot of social emotional support as well, and a lot of parent communication. The church was providing church services, also some youth events in the context of youth group. And the associate pastor from the church was on site at the community center continually. He was on both staffs, linking Sunday with those midweek things. And then we were doing the community programs that Y'Shanda described. So I would say the partnership helped for the longevity of the youth, for bridging them through the difficult seasons to greater success.
And I would add to that, specifically this year, one thing that was very powerful is that every Friday the youth completed what was called a weekly reflection. And it was a constant question. Were you a leader this week? Or actually it was, how were you a leader this week? So it wasn't as if it was optional. And eventually it rotated into who else did you see being a leader? And a lot of their leadership they noticed in school. So it goes to show you, like, everyone else was talking, but I stood in line and was quiet when I knew my teacher wasn't there. Someone else said there was a fight happening and no one else knew what to do. I ran and got an adult. So they began the importance of putting these identities continuously before them, allowed them to recognize, I am a leader. I am a learner, and not just when I'm in this space. So that was a beautiful part to see how it crossed over as well.
I would imagine that question, if you ask it so frequently, helps them to notice it in their everyday life, because they would then know, I'm going to be asked this question again next week. So,
and I think this is a really cute example. We went to Enchanted Castles at the end of first semester. And one of the young girls, so we came up with 3 ways in which we said leaders, traits about leaders. So we said leaders are brave, they take action, and they make sacrifices. So we were at Enchanted Castles, and it was the last week before the big party. One of the young girls runs up to me and she's like, Shanda, I was a leader. And I'm like, you were? And she was like, yes. I was like, well, what happened? She said, I won these pink glasses out of a machine, and this little girl was crying and she wanted them, and her mother was right there, and I gave them to her. And then the mother said, no, but I said, here, she can have them. Now, I'll be honest. Initially, I was like, that sounds like maybe you were adding to a spoiled child being a brat. I'm serious. But later, when you have to reflect and you have to look at she made a sacrifice. She was being brave. She was taking action. Like, she caused me to see her living out those traits. And I write about that in one of my papers, because as a mother who loves order and kids knowing their place, I don't see myself giving glasses to a crying child. But in her mind, I'm stepping in and being a leader. So that was, and this was at a family entertainment system. So they were learning to take those identities across multiple spaces.
Into the wider community.
Yes.
And using the word identity, we found, well, the models that we were working off of from Shanda's research showed that really one of the most powerful questions that a youth holds in junior high is, who am I? So they're developing, am I a successful person? Am I going to change the world? Am I going to be a positive influence? Or am I trouble and society doesn't want me and I never am going to have anything good to contribute? And so really all of our work is very much focused on that identity, helping them see who they are, because that becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy that they then live out for years after that.
And your readers, I just have to throw this in, they may be interested that was very purposeful. There is a theory called the social cognitive theory, and it talks about how the personal, the environment, and the behavior interact, and that in that space, cognition happens. And so the young people were learning who they were in this space that we were able to create through the YLC experience. And so that's really important that we can, and actually it builds what we call self-efficacy. And that is belief that I'm capable, not that I have the capacity to do something, to be different, to be a leader, to be a learner. And you could see that building over time as they mastered things in the apprenticeship, as they watched others who were successful before them, as we told them, you are leaders, you are learners, and we put them in situations where they were able to enact these identities.
Yeah,
so
that's great. Yes. I'm curious about the communication between the collaborators, as I imagine, in one setting you said sometimes maybe they're not doing as well. It could be really encouraging if you're in communication to know, okay, well, this kid, Luis, is not doing well in our after-school program, but he is doing great at school right now. And it's something you can hang on to, I would think. Or as you were talking about, know that there might be a time or a space when Luis is going to come back around and be doing well in your program. How did some of that communication work?
Well, I think any community worker who has tried to do collaboration would probably know that question is the heart of it, right? Because that's where most partnerships and collaborations fall apart.
Exactly.
Because it's hard enough to communicate within our own organization, much less to someone else's organization.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a very, I wouldn't say difficult. It was difficult, but challenging in a good sense of how can we meet the communication preferences of each organization and fit them together. So the communication between church and center were the easiest because our center director was the associate pastor of the church. I attended the church, so we were seeing with our own eyes what was happening in the church realm. Now, the challenge was also linking in the elders and the church leadership into this whole process, the church leaders who weren't necessarily on site during the week.
Sure.
And so that largely fell to some of the shared staff to be able to be the voice for these youth and for the center in those church leadership meetings. Now, the communication with the school changed over time. We tried to start with formal meetings, formal emails, scheduled things. These did not work out very well. But what ended up happening and ended up being really powerful is just simply being responsive to the requests of the administrator. So it got to a point where the administrators knew who the Our City kids were, and they had the personal phone numbers of our staff to be able to call when, like, this kid is in crisis, something really has happened in their lives. And so it ended up being a more natural communication between individuals who trusted each other rather than let's sit the partner down at this formal meeting with minutes.
Wow, that's great.
One of the other things, and we had talked about this at the beginning of the third year, just the understanding that the community center of all three organizations had the ability to be most malleable. And so understanding roles and the best way that you can play out that role in the children's lives. Sorry about that. And one of the most beautiful things that the young people often talked about was when they would see us come over to the school. And we actually had some of the school personnel come over to the center. And so the pastor from the church gave the 8th grade graduation speech. And so there were just a lot of ways in which the young people were seeing us cross their lives. And they talked about, like, I'm down. I might have gotten into it with a teacher, and then I see one of you in the hallway and you give me a hug, and it makes me feel like I can finish making it through the school day. So it's understanding the value of what each can bring, and that communication, if it's just in presence. If it's just
up.
you're communicating in presence, the teacher's communicating, the assistant principal coming over to the activities at the center, the center and church personnel being over at the school, we're communicating. Our presence is here as a form of support.
That's great. So we have a few questions from our listeners. So in your study, did you target gender at all? Like looking at boys versus girls, like some may think boys tend to have more negative experience in school than girls do. Did you see that?
So one thing that I did notice, and this was second year. Second year, the associate pastor who used to be more involved, Brandon, he wasn't as involved. And I saw, with a lot of other changes going on, some of the participation level of the boys began to drop off. And we had even had a conversation about, should we make it female only?
Yeah.
So some impact there of having a male presence, but the thing is, there are so much male staff at the center. They have a couple of male teachers at school. And then this third year, I did dig a little bit different, and we had a session where we talked about their challenges, and the boys put their challenges and the girls separated their challenges, and noticed that while there were a lot of similarities, the boys noted levels of challenges dealing with neighborhood level things like gangs. They talked about racism and things of that nature, people perceiving me as being tough when I'm not, or being a male minority because they were all Latino and African American students, while the girls talked about things more socially related to themselves, like their bodies. Several of them talked about their relationships with their dads. So I know that there's more there. That's as far as I've broken it down right now. But as far as attendance, the girls were more faithful. The boys came. We had a fantastic attendance rate, but as I separated out more between the two, you could see the girls gave something on a different level, and I do think there's more to dig in about that.
Yeah, so some more things to consider as your research continues. So kids are really resilient, and we know that. What are ways that you've seen kids push through really hard things?
I always try to honor the confidentiality of different children's stories, as I think it's not at all a lack of hard things, but how to best represent the things that are going on in their lives. But our children encounter death regularly around them. It can be the death of someone they love it can be, you know, the generations often in our neighborhood are closer together. So the death of a grandmother has an immediate impact on a child's life. Very often they're in the same home or in a home close by. So it can be natural things like that. It could be the violent death of someone that they know and love, or it could be someone that they don't know at all. But there's a haunting feeling when you walk by the corner where you know someone left this earth regularly. And so our youth are continually persevering on through those different things. What we found is that youth rarely want to do the very direct, like almost talk therapy approach. They don't come in and say, oh, this happened in my family, or I'm feeling this way when I walk by this gas station. A few youth would, who were really hungry for that level of attention and to be heard that way. They really wanted to tell their stories. More often than not, we would hear of the trauma through the partners around us. We would know that a shooting had occurred, or someone else would tell us that someone's dad had passed, or that one of our first year, there's changes in guardianship that happen, youth who are taken out of parents' custody or things like that. But what we saw is that because the program was fluid and responsive to the needs of the youth, they were able to come and engage more or less on their own terms.
Yeah.
And so you would see youth not confronting that trauma head on, but building this protection around them. And so even some of our youth who have really hard stories, this year they've started screen printing as part of this program. And it's just beautiful to see them 100% focused for a minute on the screen printing.
Yeah.
And know that for that minute, all the pain and just difficulty that they have to deal with in their consciousness continually can just rest for a minute while they focus on the ink and the screen and the sweatshirt. And we would see them just continue to press through that way. And then very often the mentors that were around them in that setting then would get the sit down of, hey, this happened and this is awful and I really need to talk about this.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, the one young lady whose dad had gotten shot, she came. And no one, they didn't want to redo session, but she just, and I said, are you okay being here? Do you want to take a break? What do you want to do?
Yeah.
She just wanted to go sit in the hallway for a few minutes with two of the other kids. And I was like, go ahead. But she wanted to be there. We had another young lady who literally has been all 3 years with us. 100% attendance.
Wow.
Each session, each year she had 100% attendance. And my role this third year changed a little bit. I was really in research mode this year, and I was the one that was implementing the Friday sessions. So I didn't take as much of a mentoring role as I had done in the other years.
Yeah.
And this one young lady, she noted that. And I think she didn't realize that I would read the weekly reflections. Once she started realizing that I was reading the weekly reflections, she would literally start telling me stuff. And I knew she was talking to me.
Yeah.
And so there were comments. And then at the end, we culminated with this big outing to the Cheesecake Factory. And so after their projects, and I have to talk about the projects, they were amazing because I think they speak of resilience as well. And one particular group said, named their project hashtag change, as in coins, for challenges. And they wanted to show how people look at young children on the street and talk about them. So they created a video with their peers, went in the alley and made a video of young children misbehaving and fighting. And then one of the adult mentors came along and said, those hoodlums, or something like that. And another one stepped in the frame and said, they're really not bad. They just don't have anywhere to go. And so they ended, but then they wanted to highlight. And this was their own doing. They wanted to highlight River City and our city. And they wanted to highlight a place that was doing something. And then on top of that, they did a change drive. And that was the hashtag change for challenges. And they took jars and they put them in the school. And they did a presentation to their peers in their classroom. And for a week, actually it was longer than a week, they raised change. And I think the total was about $120.
Nice.
And so it was one of their ways of saying, we see a problem, but we know we have the power to do something about it. And that group had 5 students. 2 of them dropped out. And the mentor that was overseeing them couldn't make it for like 3. And they continued to persist. Now, others of us stepped up to assist them, but they continued to persist and presented well.
Great. So one thing I want to go back to, you mentioned at the beginning, the whole framework for our city is cradle to career, and that is a piece of this program that you worked with as well. So why do you think it's important to break down the siloed conversations between education and workforce development? And can you share just a little bit about how those silos can kind of truncate a youth's progression, or when they're not siloed, how that really gives them life?
Sure. I think when we keep education and workforce in two different places, you do two things. One, if you have a youth who doesn't enjoy education or isn't successful in that component, then you've locked that in as that youth's identity. You're not providing opportunities for them to begin to shape the identity that is going to carry them the rest of their lives, of how are they engaging with the broader world in the workforce. And then the other thing that I think happens is that we begin workforce development too late. So we start workforce development. Now we're looking at a 16, 17, 18-year-old who perhaps has been unsuccessful in the educational realm. So they're already viewing themselves as having a negative identity. And then we're trying to introduce them to the workforce, building on that identity when they only have 2 years left to enter it, which is really not enough time to begin training all of that. So this model that begins the apprenticeship at age 12 in the junior high thing, you know, a lot of times our 12-year-olds are excited to work, right? They'll mow somebody's yard, they'll go, you know, paint grandma's garage or whatever and get paid for it, because for them it's an entry into the adult world they're not old enough for yet, right? They know that they're not old enough to have a real job. For our youth, they're very often already hearing the need of their household for money. Their hearts are aching for their grandmas and their aunties and their moms and their dads and uncles working so hard. And so to give them the opportunity to enter into a paid apprenticeship at age 12, one, you're building on an identity that is not formed yet regarding workforce. The world is their oyster, whatever that saying is. They're excited, they're into it, they're ready to earn money, ready to enter. And then by the time they get to age 18, they have 6 years of work history. Community, for all you legal people, this is community service with an educational stipend paid for the educational component that they all call work. It's just not legally work. But they have 6 years of engaging in something that requires grit, that requires determination, that requires consistent attendance, and a significant product being put out on their part. So that then by the time they graduate high school, they've been workforce trained already. You know, they're ready to continue in that. And because our apprenticeship is in masonry, which is very, very different from education. It has no literacy component, no sit down and write. And, you know, they're building scaffolding, they're scraping out mortar, they're putting in new mortar. Their mind is now open to the fact that not all careers are office-based. Not all careers are research and involving writing, and they know now that they can be good at something even if they're not enjoying school, that they can be very good at a trade, and they know that they can make a living that way, just as valuable of a living, just as valuable of a contribution to society, without perhaps engaging in a post-secondary component. And the ones who are interested in going to college, they know they can do anything now. Because if you can make it on a tuck pointing site in the middle of July with the mortar dust and the mixing mortar and the heat, you can do anything. And they know that, and they carry that into college with them.
Beautiful.
And it is learning. Because it's just a different type of learning.
Right.
And one of the things that we were trying to highlight with them is that you are learners, and you may struggle in one area, you may excel in the other, but you have cognitive processes that are at work at all times, and you make use of them, whether you're behind a desk or whether you're in an apprenticeship. You are learning, and thus the point of, and all learning is not academic.
Right.
And learning is social. So there was
Yes.
so much to that aspect of the learning to pull out with the young people. And I think the part that I would add why it is important to look at this holistically
Yeah.
is because society doesn't exist in a silo.
Right.
And your identities, for example, some work that I did that actually led me back to school is I did some research in a school, and it was about language. But the African Americans and Latino students that I was working with felt as if their language was not honored and valued in school, and that school was yet still another place saying, be different to belong here. And so if you're hearing, and in that time in society, on what we'll call the macro level, there was a lot of shootings and things going on and deaths with African Americans. So here you have the larger society defining you. You go to this place that's supposed to be safe, telling you you don't belong. Well, where do you belong? And so society writes a story. And so we need to be very mindful of countering some of those aspects of the story that's written about our young people, so that they're not locked into this is who you've deemed me to be, but we come alongside and say this is who you are.
That's
and
right.
So that was a part of it.
So coming back to the identity piece again, really. So another person was wondering, so on that topic, when you would ask, who am I, or they would answer, who am I, through some of the work that you were doing with them, what were some of the answers that the kids gave to that question, who am I?
Well, I didn't explicitly ask, who are you?
Yeah.
I asked on the weekly reflections who they are as leaders and learners, but I saw who they were in action. As we observed across the classroom. I would go into the school, I would go to their work sites, and there's one young kid, I was so encouraged, and I'm gonna use the word blessed right here. I was really blessed by his story, because I could see academically he struggled. He was one of the very first time I was like, okay, how do I get them to start thinking about this? So I took the song from the lyrics from a song that was powerful, Rise Up.
Yeah.
And we listened to a video, we saw some young kids singing it, and then I was like, go around and talk to each other about what this song means. And his first words, oh my God, she gave us the worst thing to do. Because immediately, it was song lyrics. But immediately, right, Beth? They wanted really absolutely nothing to do with this.
With analyze a printed piece of paper.
Yeah, this identity that it told them that doesn't work. And so I played it off. I was like, just talk about it. It's just words. And another kid goes, do we have to annotate? And so you look back at the videos, it's so funny. But it was like, we know what you're doing here. So they knew some of these academic things that were taking place. So actually, that's a great finding to point out that I wasn't pulling the wool over their eyes. They were making academic literacy connections across school right over in the center. And they would do it often, but later on, I came to find out how much he struggled. And at the end, we had a presentation, and each person had their parts, and I was helping them through. And he seemed to be struggling, so I helped to rewrite his part. And we came back the next week, and I was like, okay, just say this. And he was like, what happened to my part? I was like, it's there. I helped to rework it because you were struggling. And he said, one of the other girls looked, he goes, he went home and memorized it. So I was like, you did? Say exactly what you have.
Exactly.
He
Never
went
mind.
home and he memorized his part.
Nice.
So that, and everybody else using papers. Everybody else was using papers because it was easier. But he went home and he memorized his part. And he was in that group of with the three people. And I just saw such leadership in him. And I know that he's one that would have been relegated to the side. And I saw the resilience and his family. There's a lot with his family history and things like that, but I saw it.
Yeah. So you could see it.
I think one of the things with junior high students is that a lot of them doodle a lot on their notebooks and in their art. And so I feel like in their drawings, we get to see reflected who they think they are. And also their Facebook posts, because if you're their Facebook friends, you can see the themes that are important to them, right, that are coming up. And I feel like some of the things we saw, one was a lot of relationship with death. So there were a lot of images that bordered on suicidal things. There were images that focused on cutting. There were images that focused on the death around them. And so that was definitely part of who they perceived themselves to be, either in a suicidal way or in a loss way. But that's reflected a lot. Our students who are fatherless, that's reflected so often, especially in their social media posts. Continually this hole in their lives from missing their father. And it can look, when you first read it, like the loss is like happened yesterday. And then you'll talk to them, and for some of them it was before they were born or when they were very small. But it's such a part of their identity that they continue to express it as if it happened last week, the loss of their father. I think for our young women, their identity was built a lot around their bodies and how they were teased by the other girls regarding their bodies or the romantic relationships that they were presented with in their school. So those are just some of the themes that they perceived to be absolutely core to their identity that then we would touch on to bring those in, because you can't just simply tell a kid who believes that they're surrounded by death and negativity, you're a leader. That's not a magic thing that works. You have to engage with what are they actually hearing about themselves, and then how can you move with that?
And it was very much a process. So we really, we couldn't give you the whole, so yes, Beth is right. We weren't like, we were giving you the title. And part of what I've developed through my research is what I call the UBL process, is understanding, branding, and landing these identities. And so that's, first of all, just simply understanding this exists within you.
Right.
Understanding you can be a leader, you can be a learner. And then the branding part is simply giving them the opportunities to enact it. We're branding them when we give them these opportunities to enact the leadership and to enact the learning. And part of that social aspect where we speak it over them as well, and then landing it. And I would see it within the sessions. They would speak about it, as the young lady did when we were at the family entertainment. So they were finding these places where they were landing these identities. And so that's one thing that has come out of this whole thing. But
So both of you are deep people of faith, and you've known each other a long time. How does your faith motivation and your reliance on the Lord show up in this program and sustain you?
I think for all of us, it battles discouragement or giving up. Because sometimes what we see in front of us looks like absolutely no effect at all from what we've done on any given day. It may look like the youth have completely stepped backward. But, you know, I've been in the West Humboldt Park community for 15 years now. And what I've seen is that no matter how challenging and challenged a youth is in their adolescence, and some of my lovies who are grown now will know exactly who I'm talking about from 15 years ago. No matter how it looks at that moment, I've seen those same youth encounter Christ and encounter the Holy Spirit, and now become these beautiful leaders of their families who have a deep peace and joy in their souls. And so it keeps me from seeing any youth on any given day as they are. I see them in what Christ can do in their lives over the long term if they continue to be engaged with the body of Christ, and hopefully then directly with the Spirit of Christ that's continually surrounding them wherever they go. So I think in short, faith provides this vision of who a youth really is in their soul, and then a lived experience and belief that they can actually live that out. That's not just a heaven vision. They can actually, that can actually become their reality on earth, because I've seen God do that before.
Yeah.
And I would add, it drives everything that I do. I should have been a statistic. My mom had like 9 kids by the time she was 23. No dad around. She had dropped out of school herself in 8th grade. She went back later and became a fantastic role model. But I saw teachers, I saw community members, I saw people from church step up to make a difference in my life. And I came to faith at 19 in college. It was my husband who shared Christ with me, and we've been married 25 years now.
Wow.
But in that, I started teaching. All I ever wanted to do was go in a classroom and love on some children and give them my best. But in that, I began to see, oh, something more could be done here. And my part was to go back. I went back to school. I got my master's degree. I became an administrator. And I was like, something more can be done here. And mid-career, look at me, I'm graduating with a Ph.D., went back to school mid-career because I continue to feel like, what more can I do to be the difference in young people's lives, like people were the difference in mine. But all of that is rooted from the goodness of God that I've seen follow me all of my days. And so I just kind of try to live that out. And it took going back to school, if it took research, if that's my role, then I play it out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, our city and Beth received an Emerging Leader Grant from We Raise. And if you'd like to support innovative programs and talented leaders like Beth that are focused at the intersection of poverty, violence, and inequality, visit our website at weraise.org/donate. We also invite you to join us for future community conversations. To receive notifications about our future conversations, you can sign up to receive our monthly e-news on our website at weraise.org or like us on Facebook. So thank you again for being with us today as we learned more about developing leaders, providing protective factors for risks, and building a multifaceted collaborative approach to youth programming. We are so grateful to all of you that sent in questions and engaged in the conversations. And thank you again to Beth and Y'Shanda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.